A young mother of two was found dead inside her own beauty salon. Police had a witness, a fingerprint, DNA evidence, and a suspect who looked almost perfect on paper. 10 years later, the case was stone cold. Then a routine oil change changed everything, because the mechanic working that day recognized a face, and it brought back a secret he had been carrying for a decade. A secret that would finally name a killer. Welcome back to Old Casebook, where we cover the cases that refuse to stay buried. If you're new here, subscribe, because we bring you a real case every single week. Today's story is one of the most unexpected cold case breaks we've ever covered, and it starts with something as ordinary as getting your car serviced. Let's get into it. Dana Satterfield was born on November 16th, 1967 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She grew up in a close religious family, and people who knew her described her the same way every time. Warm, kind, easy to love, the kind of person who showed up when someone needed help without being asked. Dana was drawn to the beauty industry from early on. After high school, she trained as a hairstylist, built her skills in local salons, and eventually saved enough to open a small salon of her own in the nearby town of Roebuck. She was married to a man named Mike, and together they had 2 children, a daughter and a son. Running her own business while raising 2 kids took nearly everything she had, but Dana made it work. By the summer of 1995, she was 27 years old, and that July would be the last month of her life. Monday, July 31st, 1995. At around 6:30 that evening, a woman named Diane, who sold cleaning supplies in the area, had stopped into Dana's salon and sold her some products. Everything was completely normal. Dana was working, the lights were on, business as usual. About 20 minutes before 8:30, Diane passed by the salon again. The lights were still on. Donna was inside, cleaning up, clearly getting ready to close for the night. Dana waved at her through the window. That was the last time anyone saw Dana alive. At around 8:30, Diane was standing nearby, waiting for a ride, when she heard something strange. Dull thumping sounds coming from inside the salon. The lights were now off. Then a loud crash, and a man jumped out through the window. Diane ran into a nearby store to call 911, and almost right behind her walked the same man she had just seen jumping from the salon window. He looked at her, then left. She called the police. An officer who happened to be nearby arrived, expecting a routine break-in. What he found was something else entirely. He moved through the salon with a flashlight, and at first, nothing seemed obviously disturbed. Then, he stepped into the back room. Dana was there. Part of her clothing was missing. Her body was covered in scrapes and bruises, and a belt had been wrapped around her neck, the other end tied to a water heater, leaving her slightly suspended off the floor. Officers called for backup immediately. Cash and valuables were still inside the salon. This was not a robbery. The level of violence, the state of Dana's body, and the fact that someone had dragged her into the back room all pointed to something deeply personal. The medical examiner later confirmed it. Dana had been strangled. She had been beaten repeatedly. She had been sexually assaulted. And the attacker had left biological evidence behind. But in 1995, the FBI's national DNA database was not yet operational. There was no system to upload the sample and search for a match. Every comparison would have to be done manually, suspect by suspect. Based on Diane's description, police put together a composite sketch. a young white man, approximately 5'9", wearing a grey t-shirt and jeans. Despite knowing many locals through her work, Diane did not recognize him. He was someone she had never seen before. Inside the salon, crime scene technicians found a single fingerprint on the water heater. Since the killer had tied the belt to it, he would almost certainly have touched it. Then they found something even more significant, a second fingerprint left in blood. DNA testing confirmed the blood was Dana's, which meant that print almost certainly belonged to the killer. Neither print matched anyone in a database, and neither matched anyone in Dana's life. Detectives also found that Dana had been separated from Mike, though the two were still on good terms and trying to save the marriage for their children. Mike's fingerprint was on the water heater, but he explained he had personally installed it and done maintenance on it. He had an alibi backed by his children. He didn't match the witness description, and he passed a polygraph. He was cleared. A second witness named Ken came forward. On the night of the murder, around 8:40, he had driven past the salon and noticed something off. The lights were out, but Dana's car was still outside and parked beside the neighboring business, which he knew was already closed, was a white and blue Ford Bronco with a man standing near it. The man looked nervous and stared at Ken in a tense, aggressive way as he drove past. Police now had a possible vehicle. They looked into owners of similar Broncos. A few names came up, but nothing solid. Months passed. The leads dried up. Then a call came in from the jail. An inmate told police his cellmate, a man named Russell Quinn, had been talking about Dana. He kept saying how beautiful she had been, claimed to have a photograph of her, and had even admitted he was the one who killed her. Detectives looked into Russell and found details that fit almost perfectly. He was free at the time of the murder. He was now in jail for sexual assault, and in that case, he had tied his victim to a tree, just as Dana had been tied to a water heater. He drove a similar vehicle, and he looked strikingly like the composite sketch. Diane looked at a photo lineup. She pointed to Russell. She said he was the man she had seen. Investigators sent his DNA to the lab. Russell was not a match. Just like that, their strongest lead collapsed, and after that, the case went cold. Completely. For 10 years. By the time Dana's daughter Ashley was 18 years old, she had grown up believing her mother's killer would never be found. One ordinary day, she stopped at an auto shop for a routine oil change. While she waited outside, one of the mechanics glanced over and told his co-workers that Ashley looked a lot like Dana, the woman who had been killed 10 years earlier. His co-workers told him that Ashley was Dana's daughter. The mechanic was stunned. He hadn't even known Dana had children. He couldn't stop thinking about it because he had been carrying a secret for 10 years, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he might have known who did, and he had been too afraid to say it with his name attached. That mechanic's name was Michael. 10 years earlier, when Michael was 17, he had called police anonymously and told them that Dana's murder might have been committed by another 17-year-old named Jonathan Vick. At the time, police had looked into it. They learned that Jonathan's mother owned a white and blue Ford Bronco, and that on the night of the murder, Jonathan had been driving it. But Jonathan's mother refused to let police speak with her son or examine the vehicle. She insisted he had nothing to do with it and demanded they leave her family alone. Police tried to get a warrant. The judge refused to sign it, based only on an anonymous phone call. The lead went nowhere. Now a decade later, Michael was 27, and seeing Dana's daughter changed something in him. He called police again, but this time he gave his name. He told them everything. On the night of the murder, Jonathan had given Michael a ride home in his mother's white and blue Ford Bronco. During the drive, Jonathan suddenly said he was planning to get his hair done that night. Michael thought it was strange since it was already late, but Jonathan told him he wasn't going for a haircut. He was going there for Dana. He had been to that salon many times, as had his mother. He knew Dana, and he started talking about how beautiful she was and how he wanted to have sex with her. Michael laughed it off. Jonathan was 10 years younger than Dana, and it sounded like a teenage fantasy. Jonathan didn't take the dismissal well. He snapped back. "You don't think I can do it?" Michael still thought it was all talk. He let it drop. The next morning, the news reported Dana's murder. Michael still couldn't believe Jonathan had actually done something. But when police announced they were looking for a white and blue Ford Bronco, the realization hit him hard. Then Jonathan made it worse. He told Michael directly that if he ever said anything about that night, he would kill him. That was why Michael had called anonymously in 1995. And that was why he had never followed up until now. Seeing Ashley, growing up without a mother, pushed him through the fear. With Michael's official statement, the judge signed a warrant to collect Jonathan's DNA. By then, Jonathan was living in Greenville, about half an hour from Roebuck. He had served 2 years in the Marine Corps and now had a wife and a young daughter. But he struggled to hold down steady work, constantly getting fired over his attitude, clashing with co-workers and supervisors. He had been arrested twice, once for vandalism and once for domestic violence, but both charges had been dropped. The DNA results came back. The semen recovered from Dana's body belonged to Jonathan Vick. He denied having anything to do with the murder. He denied even knowing Dana. When officers walked him to the police car in front of reporters, he said only, "I love my wife and my daughter. That's all that matters." Based on everything investigators had learned, they were able to piece together what had happened on the night of July 31st. Jonathan had gone to Dana's salon exactly as he told Michael he would, likely using a haircut as an excuse to get inside. At some point, he made a sexual advance. Dana rejected him. Jonathan locked the front door from the inside and turned off the lights. He attacked her. Dana fought back hard. The defensive wounds on her arms and body made that clear. At some point, she lost consciousness. Jonathan dragged her into the back room, sexually assaulted her, and strangled her with the belt tied to the water heater. Then, instead of simply unlocking the front door and walking out, he climbed through the window. That one decision was what Diane had seen. It was what led her to call police. And it was what kept this case alive for 10 years until the truth finally surfaced. As investigators prepared for trial, they kept digging into Jonathan's past, and they found something alarming. In 2002, 3 years before his arrest, Jonathan had been in a relationship with a woman named Heather Sears. They had even gotten engaged, but that autumn, the engagement was called off, and 2 weeks later, Heather vanished without a trace. The last time anyone saw her, she and Jonathan had been at a bar together. After that night, she was never seen again. Her car was found at the bottom of a river. She was not inside. People who knew Heather said her relationship with Jonathan had been deeply troubled and that she had complained about abuse more than once. Jonathan had been the main suspect in her disappearance. Police were never able to prove anything. While Jonathan sat in jail awaiting trial, his cellmate contacted detectives. He said Jonathan had told him that if he could go back to one day in his life, it would be the day he walked into Dana's salon. He also admitted he had parked his car beside a neighboring business so no one would see it near the salon, and that he had climbed out of the window because he was terrified. Dana may not have been his only victim. The trial began in November 2006, more than 10 years after Dana was killed. Jonathan maintained his innocence throughout. His defense argued that police hadn't seriously investigated other suspects. Prosecutors laid out the full picture: the DNA match, Michael's testimony, the Ford Bronco, Jonathan's own admissions to his cellmate, and the years of lies. The jury found Jonathan Vick guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. When the sentence was handed down, he broke down in tears and insisted the real killer was still out there. Jonathan will be eligible to apply for parole in 2035. It is unlikely to be granted. While in prison, he attacked a correctional officer and received an additional 3 years. And that incident will weigh heavily on any future hearing. After his arrest, investigators also found an abandoned car registered in Jonathan's name. Inside were strands of hair and what appeared to be bloodstains. There wasn't enough material to run DNA testing, but investigators believe that car may be directly connected to Heather's disappearance. If they are right, Dana was not his only victim. Dana Satterfield was 27 years old. She had built a business from nothing, raised 2 children, and was loved by everyone who knew her. For 10 years, her children grew up believing they would never get justice. Then a girl who looked like her mother walked into an auto shop for an oil change, and a mechanic who had been carrying a secret for a decade finally found the courage to let it go. Sometimes, the truth survives longer than anyone expects it to, and sometimes it takes the face of a daughter to bring it back to the surface. If this case stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Subscribe to Old Casebook for a new real case every week. Because some cases don't get solved by detectives. They get solved by ordinary people who finally decide the truth matters more than their fear.